But I want to, again, thank you all for being here. We've had a productive morning already. I know we have some really interesting facilitated dialogues this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to it. Let me just do a quick introduction of Carol Schneider. All of you have in your program a nice biography of Carol, but I'll just make this more personal if I can. I first met Carol, I think, in 1986 or 1987. She had come on to AAC&U maybe a year or two before.
The only person ever hired from junior high.
And she was the vice president and then became executive vice president for AAC&U. Let me tell you, AAC&U is 1,300 institutions of higher education now?
1350.
1,350. I'm on the membership committee, I should know this. 1,350. So it's the largest in many ways, the most powerful, most interesting, educationally centered higher education organization. We've been members since the 30s. It started, it's up to its 100th year this coming year. It was the American Association of Colleges before it was the American Association of College and Universities. It has colleges and universities from all sectors, so that's really exciting. And it's been the intellectual leader in higher education, certainly since Carol was down there. It wasn't always that way. It is really the center. For those of you that had the privilege to go to some of the meetings, either regional or national meeting, know that it's a hothouse of ideas and excitement about practices, and it's always trying to lead in terms of getting ahead of the issues. So I'll just give you two quick stories to sort of introduce you. In the early 90s, when diversity became a significant issue and commitment and challenge on our campuses, that is to say, campuses were trying to figure out how to become more diverse, and then once having populations on their campus that were informally not part of their campus, how to actually make them feel welcome and deal with all the issues that came from the larger society onto our campus in terms of intercultural experience and expectations. And so, and the political forces at the time were trivializing that whole attempt to bring more diversity to our campuses, and we're looking at it as dumbing down education, with all the biases inherent in that term I just used. And Carol, as a national leader, as a relatively new national leader at AAC&U, really forged ahead and created something called cultural
American Commitments, Diversity, Democracy, Liberal Learning.
There we go, American Commitments. And she linked democracy and democratic ideals to the diversity piece, which you would think is intuitive now, because we talk that language all the time. But if it wasn't for Carol, we wouldn't have had that combination in that way. It was being presented initially as just an interest group that wanted into education. And she saw the larger purpose of going back to our essential foundations. And American Commitments became a tremendous program because what it did, it brought large numbers, and I participated as a faculty member and then later as a dean, large numbers of faculty from cohort schools, a couple hundred schools maybe over time, to learn the canon, to expand the canon of higher education, which was so Western-centered, to really develop and understand and appreciate this incredible scholarship on all the others, so to speak, and that incorporate that into a new canon. And that was tremendous work. It was actually transforming an entire sector, our entire sector, in a dramatic way, in a very intelligent, responsible way. So that was one great thing. We've done so many other things that have come out of AAC&U in terms of a commitment to what Carol calls high impact practices, HIPs. And we know about HIPs because we practice those things. Learning communities, and first year programs, and civic engagement programs, and intense writing in the disciplines, and big senior projects and signature projects, and so on and so forth. And also pioneered a lot of work in assessment, and making assessment something which was intimate to learning, and not just something which was a burden that we had to do to please others, but rather a way in which we ourselves go through the reflective practice of thinking about how our students are learning, are they learning, and are we able to be effective as teachers in terms of the mission that we set for ourselves in our individual classes as well as in our institution or departments. And then more recently, Crucible Moment, which I had a privilege to play a small role in terms of a task force, really began to look at the civic mission of institutions, the practice and history of it, all the way through the current practice, and moving us from a notion of, which was an advance, a big advance, of service learning, of service connected to your course, to the notion of civic engagement and civic learning. Again, back to our ambitions about democracy, democratic education, citizenship, the whole issue of equity, access, completion, the whole notion of addressing an entire nation to be educated, not just some of the nation to be educated. So I can't say enough about Carol. She holds the honorary doctorate from Wagner College. 2001, somewhere in that area. Yeah.
Maybe two.
I was provost at the time, so I remember that. So, in addition, as you know, she went to Mount Holyoke as an undergraduate, did her history PhD at Harvard, spent a lot of time at the University of Chicago, really developing adult learning programs.
Yeah.
So, Mary, where are you, Mary? So there we go. And she can say a lot about what she learned pedagogically from dealing with adults that really transferred in many ways into a much larger vision that she had, but some of the great perspectives. So without ado, Geary Schneider.
Well, thank you. That was a very generous introduction. And those of you how many of you have in fact heard me before here? Quite a few, but not everybody. Okay, those of you who know I've been back frequently know I come back to get my education updated at Wagner. And that if good things were done as they were in the American Commitments, Diversity, Democracy, and Liberal Learning Initiative, it was because we developed the habit at AAC&U of seeking to learn actively from our most thoughtful members. And so there's literally nothing I ever talk about, and nothing I'm going to talk about this morning, that I haven't learned somewhere else, and a lot of it from Richard and his chums. Just this morning I got Dan Sullivan's great essay on the value breakthrough, the approach to assessment you're talking about. I've been blessed with great mentors, and it's a privilege to come back to Wagner and to have a chance to talk with you about a question Richard, who is on my board, put to us as we looked forward to our centennial. Where is it you are going next? Don't celebrate the last 100 years. What is it you're launching for the second century? And I am really here, the real purpose of this talk is to get your feedback and Ellis's feedback, Ellis being, I believe, the only student in the room. Any other students? Okay, we have one. He's been told he can't leave. Other students? Where? I'm so blind, I can't. Oh, okay, good. All right, excellent. And front row, or practically the front row. This is very impressive. My own son always went routinely to the very back of the room. So I want your feedback, because the main thing I want is to talk with you about a next frontier for liberal education that is in the making. But it's building, as we hope all of our work does, on the insights gained from a generation of experimentation and innovation across higher education, and certainly at Wagner. So what I'm going to do is try to talk as quickly as possible about the sort of big picture for liberal education, just to make sure we're all on the same page. I will certainly nod at your role in helping to invent what I'm calling a new vision for liberal education that's already making its way through all parts of higher education. I want to talk a little bit about how we actually make the case for this in this moment of extreme economic anxiety. I would like to say that if we could persuade all our publics that we were preparing good citizens on our campuses, that would be a selling point. It isn't. They want to know that we're preparing people for the economy, so I'll talk a little bit about that. But then I want to go to what I'm calling the LEAP Challenge, and your wisdom, based on your considerable experience, as to what it would take to make it work. And cued by Richard's remarks earlier this morning, I will also try to mention general education as I go, so to suggest the ways in which the LEAP Challenge can connect to a new understanding of why we commit ourselves in American higher education to liberal education, to general education. So that too. And I have a handout. I hope you all got the handout. I will be referring to it at various points. Anyone not have it? Hands up if you don't have it. Because the first thing I want to go to is the confusion of terms. Richard is using the term liberal education to describe what you're doing here. But wherever we go nationally, we understand that beyond the academy, and unfortunately within the academy, there's an incredible confusion about what does liberal education mean? Is that just something they only do at liberal arts colleges, a view that students hold? What does it have to do with the liberal arts and sciences disciplines? How does it relate to general education? So I'm just calling your attention to this effort that AAC&U has been making, which is on the handout, to try to clarify the differences amongst those terms. When I use the term liberal education, I am not referring to specific disciplines, and I am not referring to general education, and I'm not referring to something that can only be done at a liberal arts college. I am talking about, in the terms of the definition on the handout, an approach to education that is deliberately designed to prepare students for complexity, for diversity, for change, one that emphasizes broad learning, but also emphasizes the development of strong intellectual skills and personal and social responsibility skills, and above all, teaches students to actually apply that learning to real problems. That's the definition we use, and it is a definition that applies to the entire educational experience, curriculum, co-curriculum, all disciplines, not just to the arts and sciences, and definitely not only to general education. One other term I'll be using that I'm not going to take time to describe is our LEAP initiative, Liberal Education and America's Promise. But page 3 on the handout tells you all about it, so you can look at that at your leisure. Basically, I want to make the argument that the strength of America's signature educational tradition, liberal education, is that it consistently adheres to enduring goals while constantly adapting its practices to the needs of our time and the needs of society. The enduring goals, I think, are very simple. Liberal education has always tried to provide the kind of broad knowledge of science, society, that prepares you to be at home in your own world. And by definition, the knowledge you need over time is changing because our sense of that world evolves. But it's always tried to provide broad knowledge. Secondly, it's always been concerned with developing the powers of the mind. Always understood that the only thing we really have in our lives is the judgment we form in our own minds in dialogue with others, and that learning to think well, to think responsibly, is a cultivated practice. And then finally, a sense of civic and social responsibility, some sense of ethical and moral and social responsibility to yourself and to others. The meanings of that have certainly changed dramatically from the ancient world to contemporary democracies, but that is always a third dimension. The practices evolve, the goals are enduring, and they are fundamentally are worth fighting for in a moment when higher education is besieged by an incredibly instrumentalist, narrow, reductionist conception of why people go to college. And I will come back to that point. So I want to locate what you're doing in the new vision of liberal education I'm talking about in all that remains of my training as an historian on this slide. I gave it all up for you. But to remind you, especially those of you who are closer to my age, the things we take for granted in terms of the organization of the undergraduate experience, the notion of general studies first and advanced studies second, that's not the way it was in the 19th century. It was all general education. It was all sequential. There were no majors. Everyone studied the same curriculum, which culminated in a moral theology course taught usually by the president of the college. Are you up to that, Richard?
I've not read it.
It's only with the emergence of the research mission of the university and the disciplines that we in fact begin that characteristic division of labor that is actually pushed by Harvard, the latest thing in 1909, I like to say. Breadth first, depth second, or as they said in Cambridge, distribution first, concentration second. And over time, for too many students and too many institutions, liberal education contracted to be only the breadth part. And the majors were often thought to not even be part of the liberal education enterprise. What we have been trying to do as an association is to reclaim a notion that the entirety of your educational experience, curricular, co-curricular, field-based, community-based, academically based, it's all about building those capacities that liberate you and prepare you to take responsibility for the quality and the decency and the justice of life in our society. So that for a long time I've been saying that we're a curriculum in transition. I think we were saying that back in the late 80s, Richard. Rethinking how to organize better, to do this better, recognizing that we were now in a global era, not a Western era, that civic and diversity were important components of what it meant to prepare you for democracy, and increasingly recognizing the importance of innovation in the workplace, another thing I'll come back to. Our work for a long time, and certainly since I became president in 1998, has been about trying to capture what was happening through all these experiments all across higher education. Greater Expectations was a national dialogue about goals and best practices. And we asked you, what are the practices that would work to prepare students for a 21st century environment? Now we know that those are high impact practices, and something about that is on your handout. Recognizing that we had notions of where we wanted to go, but were far from getting there, we invented LEAP and promised to keep it going for 10 years. Now apparently perpetuity is LEAP's intention. It was launched in 2005. We're going into that second century, and I do want to talk with you about where we're going with that work. But I am contending now that out of all of this, out of all the experimentation, out of all the invention of better ways of educating our students, found certainly at Wagner, but also found in many other parts of higher education, we do have a conception of what we mean by high quality learning in view. Liberal education is central to it, and Wagner is a leader in that work. This emerging vision includes a set of essential learning outcomes, which I assume you've all memorized, but just in case. I was a little perturbed to see they weren't on the handout this morning. But page 4, the essential learning outcomes are an updated vision of those enduring goals. The broad knowledge, a very contemporary understanding of how we develop powers of the mind, intellectual practical skills, as we call them here, lifting out the notion that we are educating citizens and not just people who are privately, personally being educated or prepared for work, that it is about building capacity for democracy. The 21st century piece of it is the notion that we want to help our students integrate and apply their learning, that its understanding is not enough, content delivery received by students who wrote it down and kept that knowledge for a while is far from enough. It's what students can actually do with their learning that makes it an empowering education, and this is where the innovations have been going. High impact practices are on page 5 or 6 of your handout. I won't describe them. Last time I was here, I believe I persuaded you that there was nothing on this list that you hadn't already done and done well. And I will say that one of my concerns thinking ahead to the 21st century, second century of AAC&U work, is that too many institutions may be settling for having the right list of essential learning outcomes, and they can prove that they are providing these high impact practices to all their students. I think our question has to be, is it adding up? Is it really coming together for students? So the emerging vision includes not just the outcomes and not just the practices, but what I am now indulging myself in describing as an intelligent redesign of the undergraduate experience. Intelligent redesign. And it's all here. You were pioneers in it. It's the notion of a cornerstone to capstone form to the curriculum. A strong focus across the curriculum on helping people put things together across courses, across disciplines, field-based learning, academic learning, personal development, and academic learning. Intentional connections with big questions in real-world communities. Often, although not always, those questions are civic, global, intercultural, environmental, ethical questions. I'm thinking not just of the kinds of things you do in your own learning communities, but for example, in the huge CSU system with 430-some thousand students, they're now trying to invent thematically organized pathways for general education that would culminate in the senior year and that would provide a point of continuity for feeder community colleges, which would have their version of the thematic pathway, so that whenever students transferred, they would still be working on something like environmental sustainability or social justice or global learning. And the courses aren't just being taken, they're coming together as general education pieces of larger questions. And as I'm implying, I hope, intentional connections between general education and majors, I think everyone recognizes now that you can't take this set of essential learning outcomes, announce you're doing it in general education, 1/4 of the curriculum, and it's all going to work out optimally. We have to be cultivating these capacities in ways that are appropriate to the majors. And so that means critical thinking is going to take one form in the English department and another form in the economics department, but all of us are working on these forms of essential learning. As I've already said, and we'll say again, with the Wagner Plan, you became an early leader in this new direction for integrative and practical liberal learning. We all went to graduate school on critical thinking, except for the students who haven't done that yet, but may. And so we all see the limitations of what we're doing, and I know that. I know that you can tell me all the ways in which it could be even better at Wagner. But you were early pioneers. You had the vision to have a notion of cross-cutting integrative themes and a civic mission for the institution. And it's one of the reasons why I do keep coming back here, because I think, and I found again this morning, a lot of reflection, a lot of insight as to how to make it actually work for your students, but also for the communities you serve. At the same time, we do understand that we have to make the case for this new direction in college learning. We understand that we are indulging ourselves as a nation at the moment in a conversation that's all about instrumentality, all about how much money you can make, and people actually proposing to rate us by how much students are actually going to make in their first job out of college, or maybe 5 years. No one knows quite what the moment is that they want to put the finger on the dial and say, this is the salary income that shows how good your education was. That's the kind of stupid conversation we're having as a nation. Those of you who are early pioneers have to be part of the choir that reaches out to say, no, education is so much more than this. It has to be more than this for our students, for our society, for the future of our global community. And as I said before, I would like to be able to say to you, if we could just show how what you're doing here and at other similar kinds of institutions, how it works for a better democracy, better global community. I would like to say that that would be the selling point. But in fact, we have learned through a decade of LEAP effort to try to make the case for liberal education that what really gets people's attention is the economic argument. So I'm just going to say a little bit about how we make that economic argument. And then I want to come back to the topic that really matters to me, which is how we make it work for students, how we connect this new vision of liberal education to students' own big questions and to what matters to them and to their sense of the future we're building together. But the top recommendation is that we have to connect the case we're making for the kind of education you're offering here to where the economy is going. To not just to what employers are saying, but to what economists themselves are telling us about where the jobs of the future already are and where they are going to be even more compellingly as we go forward. So from a couple of economists, can you see this trend line? The lines that are going up have to do with the demand over time since the 1960s for people who are capable of working with new information, the kind of information that's just arriving via research or being all the other ways in which information and data is now presented to our society. Demand also going up for people who can work with what these economists call unstructured problems, open-ended problems, problems to which we don't yet know the answer. The demand is going down for people who are competent in routine manual tasks, and routine cognitive tasks. And the argument these two economists, one at MIT, one at Harvard, are making is that if a task can be done to a rule, it could be computerized. It likely has been computerized, or someone is doing it now, or it's been outsourced to less educated populations. That if something can be done in a routinized way, it no longer needs people to do it. But that there is a premium, and a premium for this economy, on educating people who can bring their trained rational intelligence, their human minds, to complement and work with the things that computers can do for us. And, you know, for me, the obvious case is you check in at the airport, and it's all done for you automatically, unless, of course, there's a problem. And then, and then it's you and the human beings working together, aided by technology, but it's that kind of judgment that actually helps you work through the problems. And the future of work, the future of our democracy, both depend on our bringing our best trained intelligence and creative imagination to work with those problems to which we don't yet know the automated solution. So this is how Levy and Murnane put it, that solving problems for which human work is going to increasingly shift toward two kinds of tasks: solving the problems where we don't yet have standard operating procedures, and working with new information and weaving that into our sense of what it is to do next. And therefore, the jobs that are going to pay decent incomes to people are going to be jobs that require a deeper level of knowledge and more complex skills in order to make sense of the complexity. I think many, but perhaps not all of you know that AAC&U has been surveying employers for several years. Richard mentioned this morning, and I'm going to give you all of these surveys are on our website. The site will be on this PowerPoint. But my overall observation is that what the employers are telling us, both in face-to-face gatherings and through these surveys, reflects what's happening in the economy. That they are adjusting their sense of what they're looking for in well-prepared graduates to what's going on in the economy. So here's the 4 surveys. The first was 2007, the most recent, 2013. We are preparing now to do another one. And this one will juxtapose what students think with what employers think. And I can tell you, we've been doing focus groups around the country with students. Most students do not have a vocabulary to describe any of this and have a very hard time connecting what they're doing in college to what they think they'll be doing in work. The most recent one called "It Takes More Than a Major: Employer Priorities for College Learning and Student Success." Some of the key findings from that are on page 5 of your handout, which organizes the answers in terms of the broad categories of liberal learning that AAC&U has been using. But here on this PowerPoint are a few of the data points that are not necessarily on that page. One was, and this is interesting to me, when we told the survey researchers, Hart Research, that we wanted this question on the survey, they really weren't sure why we wanted it. And to my mind, it is explanatory for everything else. The employers were asked how important innovation was to their company's continued success, and 92% said essential. If we can't innovate, if we can't adapt, we're going to die. 93% said, and we knew this from earlier surveys, they said it again, that they're asking people to take on more responsibilities and to use a broader set of skills than in the past. They don't want to hire people who can just do one thing. They want people who have a multidimensional skill set. 91% agree that the challenges their employees face, because they're innovating, are more complex than they were. And in this context, 95% agree that their companies put a priority on hiring people with the intellectual and interpersonal skills to help them contribute to innovation in the workplace. Undergraduates, that's what your future employers will be asking. We're making changes. Can you help us make those changes? 93% said that whatever the major, students demonstrated capacities to think critically, to communicate clearly, and to solve complex problems is more important than their undergraduate major. And that solve complex questions, I think, is the key. We've done enough surveys now that I have a sense myself, although I'm not a survey researcher, of which phrases will get a very strong response. And we know that every time we put the word problem or problem solving in a question, employers go off the charts. They are not interested, they've told us this personally, in people who just understand the thing academically. They want people who can actually put their knowledge to work, and 91% of them say we want our candidates to have experience in solving problems with people whose views are different than their own, which is of course built into the DNA of the Wagner Plan and has been for a long time. Ethics and diversity are also top priorities for employers. This set of questions comes from a prompt about when you're down to the final judgment about someone you might hire. You're looking at a short list of final candidates. What are the things that really make the difference? Ethical judgment and integrity, 96%. Comfortable working with colleagues and our clients from diverse cultural backgrounds, 96%. Continued capacity for new learning, 94%. We also queried whether or not giving something back to the communities in which companies were located was a consideration, because we'd heard people talking about that in focus groups, and it comes up 71%, but it's not as dominant as some of the other responses we're seeing, not yet. On the other hand, we are hearing from employers who come to our tables that because they are hiring so many graduates who've had experience in service learning as undergraduates, that they are increasingly seeing they have to make a case that our company is about service in order to get the kind of people they want. So that's good to know. We also asked about the liberal arts and sciences, and the question here is whatever they majored in, agree or disagree, that all students should have broad learning in the liberal arts and sciences, and 80% of the respondents said yes, in contrast to some governors who see it differently. And finally, this is a question we've asked, I think, on all of the surveys of employers. This is just the most recent iteration. Which is more important? Breadth plus depth, breadth only, or specific training for a specific field only. And the percentage of employers who want only training in a specific field keeps going down, down, down. Now it's only 16%. Overwhelmingly, they want both breadth and depth. But interestingly, this 29% saying broad learning only, which is telling you about something about the environment in which these people find themselves. So that's the bones of the case I think we can make for the kind of thing you are doing here. It is intimately tied to where the economy is going. Public-spirited and civic-minded though you are doing your best to educate students who see themselves as learning something in college about how to integrate their learning, how to connect experiential learning with academic learning, how to do something in the community with people whose views and experiences are different than their own. And this is why I always regard you as such a leader in where liberal education needs to go. And it's why I was eager to have the opportunity to talk with you about our own envisioned next step in the same direction. And that envisioned next step is something we're calling the LEAP Challenge, and you can find it on the back page of this handout. So while you're just letting your eyes glance over it, let me do the setup for it, and then we will talk about it, because I most want your wisdom on whether this is a good idea, and if so, how to make it work. I'm going to guess you'll say it's a good idea because Richard's on my board and he said it was a good idea, but you never know. This could be the moment. So the LEAP Challenge. And here's the general idea, that breaking free of breadth and depth, we should position ourselves, both in liberal and specifically in general education, as deliberately preparing students from before they apply to college and certainly once they enter, to develop their competence in problem-centered inquiry that centers on specific problems and questions, and meaningful application of learning. And let me just stop and embroider a little bit about general education, since you are having a dialogue about that at Wagner. It's an American signature, as I assume you know, that we don't let students just have a major. Go to England, a degree means that you have studied in a particular field and possibly cognate fields related to it. But we've insisted for more than a century on broad education across the liberal arts and sciences. And the question is why? Why don't, I asked my own son why he thought you were making him take more science courses, and he said, so I can try it one more time before I decide against it once and for all. And there is something to that, and you know that. But the argument also is that whether he's going to be a science major or not, he'll be making decisions as a citizen about questions that involve scientific claims, scientific analysis, etc. And similarly, history, the humanities, the social sciences, we need all of these perspectives for judgments and decisions that we are going to make as citizens collectively and individually. And so that's the higher-minded argument for general education. It's what was said when general education was first being invented. It's what the Harvard report, the Red Book, said right after World War II, that general education would be building our capacities as a democracy by teaching them the modes of analysis as well as the disciplinary content, cross-disciplinary content, that all of this would make a better citizenry. But I think we have to ask, if we're just honest with ourselves, whether making people take 2 courses in the humanities and 2 in the social sciences and 2 in science or whatever it is, adds up to anything. Can it add up to anything if they're not actually engaged in applying the perspectives of those disciplines to problems that require more than one of those disciplines? Now, I am very mindful as I say this that your learning communities in the first year set this up, and that puts you ahead of most institutions. But I would argue that routinely general education is both insisted on and underperforming, designed for underperformance across American higher education. So a lot of this thinking about the LEAP Challenge is coming out of work we're doing now with major funding from the Gates Foundation on where general education might go to become a gem. General education maps and markers. How do we create general education programs that in fact are distinctively jewel-like in their capacity to prepare people for problem-centered inquiry and meaningful application of learning. So the idea is that students would be told from the day they enter that they have come to college not to complete a major, not to get their gen eds done and out of the way, not even to have field-based learning experiences and service learning, but rather to develop their capacity to work on complex problems to which we don't yet know the answer, and where we may never agree on the answer. Equally important. Most significant questions are going to be contested. So general education and liberal education broadly are introducing students to the kind of inquiry that builds capacity to solve complex cross-disciplinary problems, bringing in field-based experience as well as academic experience. And therefore, the notion is that if students are doing this, we ought to be able to see in their metaphorical portfolios and maybe their literal e-portfolios what work they've been doing on problems that matter to them. Now, I was saying to somebody informally this morning that I had personal questions that were guiding my choice of courses, my choice of a major, and my choice of a senior project when I was an undergraduate at Mount Holyoke. Nobody ever asked me. Nobody ever asked me why I was doing the things I was doing and what connections I was making in my own mind between the academic learning and my personal development. And in fact, I lost over time any sense that I was pursuing personal questions because I was so proud of the academic skills that I was developing and showing that I had them. So by the time I was a senior, I was really not conscious of the connections between my senior thesis and things I was asking much more overtly and nakedly in freshman papers. I think all students have questions they care about, and our challenge is to see whether or not they believe that their study in college is building their capacity to pursue those questions in meaningful ways. So, and the concept we're busy inventing now is signature work, that students ought to think that they are in college to put their own signature on a question or problem or family of problems that represent their concerns and their developing capacities, their proficiencies, their achievement of those learning outcomes, but not abstract and detached from something, but rather manifest. The learning outcomes are there in the work they have done on problems that matter to them. So in this context, the first year experience would be, as you are doing, introducing illustrative questions and problems. And I know you're now all experimenting also with a second semester piece of this that might take that further. But the entire educational experience would be positioned as building students' capacity to grapple with and do something analytic, evidence-based, and meaningful with significant questions. The student's portfolio would demonstrate deep engagement with one or more significant problems, problems that matter to them, problems whose importance to society they're prepared to explain. Disciplinary competence would still be foundational. No one is arguing against the major, but we are saying that majors are not enough and that students need guided practice in expanding the perspectives and insights of their majors by bringing other disciplinary and community voices into play as those majors are applied to particular problems. And both for citizenship and for work, remember what I said about the employers responding almost automatically to the notion that we're of problem solving, that students can describe what problems they've worked on and can describe them in a way that is compelling to employers, but that is also meaningful to our democracy. And coming to one of the themes of the day, the whole notion of digital innovations, that we should be exploring ways that digital innovation can free up our time. Now I'm channeling what Don Stern said this morning, from content delivery, information delivery, to significant work on important questions. There's no doubt in my mind as an historian that today there's infinitely more interesting ways to learn the historical content than to listen to me lecture on it. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But we all need, certainly novice learners need, but so do all of us, opportunities to think about the implications of what we just learned through studying, in my case, history, what it means for problems we're dealing with today. What are the recurring questions behind historical particularities? What are the common questions, the enduring questions that we always have to deal with about the meaning of life, the meaning of a good community, the nature of a community that you may find in particular investigations? So we should be insisting that digital creativity be deployed in ways that allow more time and more space for what you at Wagner have already pioneered helping students put it together. I think there ought to be reflective tutorials every year, not just once, but modeling again and again what it means to integrate and apply and evaluate the learning from different contexts and different modalities. And we're going to need active leadership, active advocacy for ways to use digital platforms to amplify inquiry-based learning. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I am not going to be the leader of the digital revolution. This is not my DNA. But one of the things we've done through the GEMS project has been to bring some amazingly creative digital leaders. Some of you may know the name Randy Bass. He's at Georgetown University, Candace Till at Stanford, and numerous others at various broad access and selective institutions. And they are working on, the initial query to them was, what are some of the digital tools that are already being invented that we ought to draw into gen ed reform? So for example, if we know that math can be taught, certain kinds of math more successfully with automated programs, why shouldn't we use them? But this group is so far beyond whatever I initially asked them to do. They're going to be talking at our annual meeting under the label Liberal Education Unbound, and they will be specifically exploring ways that we can use digital strategies to get more of the high-impact practices, more research, more engaged learning, more engagement with collaborative communities at home and abroad. And this, I think, is where we all have to put our energies and our commitment as a community, not just to digital tools one course at a time, but rather to digital strategies used to make more of the best that liberal education can be. And that is still very much work in the making, but I think it's where we need to go. So the LEAP challenge in detail is to, as you've seen if you've now looked at this page, to make students' signature work lasting a semester or more an expected component of college. Something we expect of all students. You've been doing this for a while. You have all your students doing some kind of capstone or senior project, I believe, and it is integrative and cross-disciplinary. And so I want to know from you what you have learned by insisting on this as a component element of the college experience. What we should have in mind as we try to make this argument about needed learning for all students, not just at small colleges, but at big places. What have you learned? What have you students experienced? What have the faculty learned about how to get students to take seriously the preparation for a senior project? Or is it even the senior project? Is it maybe other pieces? I don't know really whether all students would say my senior project was my most important work. It maybe it's just something they have to do. But where do you see the Wagner Plan coming to life for your students in ways that might inform us as we prepare to make this challenge to higher education, that all students ought to be prepared to do meaningful work across the curriculum as part of their undergraduate studies? So that's my question to you, and I am keenly interested in your answers. Thank you. So initial reactions to the LEAP challenge and then wisdom that might, yes, and tell me your name.
Hi, I'm Nancy Trotsky. I'm in the nursing department.
Uh-huh.
I think one of the most important things, at least for our students here through the Wagner Plan, is that they have to understand the relationships that we have outside in the communities are as important as their relationships here in the college. If we don't have those interdisciplinary type relationships, then we're not going to have that growth that the student needs. And they need to learn to respect that, to communicate with the outside agencies, because they are important for the growth. And I think we try to do that on a daily basis.
So the ongoing partnerships, that you have an ongoing relationship with community partners who are themselves the site and source of some of these significant questions.
Very significant.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the student wouldn't have that experience.
Right.
I know right now we're dealing with the Liberian community. Staten Island happens to be the largest city that hosts Liberian community. Very few people know that. So right now we're trying to connect with them so that the Liberian community has some resource on the Ebola virus, which has been in the news every day. But we're trying to get our students to realize the impact that those individuals are feeling. How can we help? So we have, I know in nursing, we have our students now engaged in developing brochures and information for a major walk that they're having in Poland on Sunday, and they're very inspired by it. But if we didn't have those connections, and we have them sometimes just within our own community here, we go to our own students first and say, how can you connect us to communities that you may live in or individuals you know, and it works really well. Because once you get one relationship, we seem to be getting another relationship, and sometimes we have to say no, and we hate to say no. It just takes off.
And do you see that, I mean, I could certainly see that students would understand that the work they're doing in relation to Liberians, the Liberian community, the Ebola crisis is extremely significant. Do you see that kind of thing paying off in their choice of what to do after they take whatever course this is?
Well, to be honest with you, this is just this week we're doing this, so that follow-up will maybe come in the next few weeks. But they're excited about it, they feel like they're making an impact, they're helping, they're helping individuals, and like the Liberian community is very, they're very thankful, and there's quite a few disciplines involved trying to help the ladies, not just nurses.
Because it seems to me that part of that's a wonderful example, but also for me it raises the question, what are we doing to cultivate further beyond your learning experience the inquiry questions that emerge from this? I mean, students are thinking, thoughtful people, and there are a lot of new learning is going on, so what questions are forming in their own mind, and how do we capture that so that it's not lost, it's not just a one-shot experience? Yes. Yes, you in the blue sweater. Tell me your name, please.
Oh, Paul. I just was going to say to recap what Nancy said, and in relation to your question.
And would you tell me who you are?
Paula, nursing.
Okay.
Just that I think the big piece of leadership our students start to get when they are partnering, no matter what department we are from in Wagner, that there's a strong sense not just of civic engagement. You said what else do they get from it and where do they go from here? I just think a lot of students, until they came to Wagner, didn't see that there's such an outside world to learn about. They've sort of been involved in their own small worlds. And when they come here, it's not only the community here, they start seeing that, there's a whole area that they never knew about, and they start figuring out how they fit in. Plus, while they're doing so, they are the leaders. And I don't think they ever thought of themselves as a student to be a leader.
And would your students agree with that? That the experiences you're having in the community are building a sense of your own potential role as leaders? Two of you are nodding and two of you are looking at me with some concern. Yes, and tell me who you are.
I'm Antonetta. I'm nursing. We're grad students. We done December. Just from my experience, I came here as an undergrad also, and a lot of this, even back then, was a big part of our learning. And even communities we went into back then, I graduated in '96 with my bachelor's, and I still go into certain communities, and they remember us. They're like, you were from Wagner. So, and we continue, just different volunteering and passing it on to other people. Carries with you, especially if you're a native islander and you continue to live here. It's your community, it's your home. So.
Anybody want to add to that? Yes.
For nursing, I think most people think of a hospital environment when it's so much bigger than that. And going into the communities and the changes you can bring to those communities, how you can help people, I think is so important for the students to see. It makes everything come full circle for them.
Okay. Yes, person with the turquoise blouse on.
I'm Sarah Donovan in the philosophy department, and this made me think of a project that actually my colleague Margarita Sanchez and I have been working on, where we've been following up with students who
following up with students at what level after
they've graduated, but the ones who have been most civically engaged, and in retrospect asking them to reflect on it. And I think it would probably be better if we could encourage it as they're going through, but I know it's been very instructive to us, and I think also for them, after they've written something for us describing their experience, that they sort of say, oh, okay, so I'm looking at this after the fact, but they can reconstruct the narrative of what it was that they were doing. So maybe there's a way to catch it earlier, but certainly we've had some success in catching it after the fact.
And what's the it? Catching a significant question, a significant problem? I mean, am I framing this right?
Yes, yes. Well, so the students that we followed up on were, they were fellows in particular areas. So one student focused on business, one focused on health concerns in the community. And so they had already for themselves connected the disciplines that their major to a community problem. And so I mean, these were the students, this is sort of catching the low-hanging fruit, because they were the ones who, this was their college career. I don't know how you do it with students who are maybe less clear on what the trajectory is, but these students, you can tell from their coursework, you can tell from the projects that they followed through the 4 years what they were doing. And when we asked them, they could tell us.
See, what I'm anticipating is trying to catch this, as you say, at an earlier stage,
Yes.
so that it's not retrospective what was coming together for you when you were at Wagner, but rather for the sophomore. What are some of the issues that have come into focus for you through your experiences at Wagner that might be the basis of your signature work? Not assuming that you have to decide right then, but nonetheless, somebody is asking how it's adding up or whether it's adding up. Yes?
Well, I'm just following what Sarah said. These were the Paul Richmond scholars, what we call the Paul Richmond scholars, who graduated last semester. 85% or 90% of them were bilingual.
We're bilingual?
Yes.
Ah.
Which was quite important for them because they were all placed in the Paul Richmond community, which is largely Spanish speaking. And this is another challenge that probably Nancy shares with me, which is, they are working in a community where a lot of people don't speak English. Many of the inhabitants of the Paul Richmond community are traditionally either, Spanish speaking, but some of them don't even speak Spanish, or Mixteco speaking. So we did this research at the end of their careers, but since they were both in our learning community from the beginning and in the Spanish classes throughout their careers, we were following their trajectory the whole time.
And what's the conclusion you draw from that?
Well, I think one of the most important, one of the interesting facts is that all of them, or most of them, did the research on the immigrant communities, the senior thesis. One of them is an anthropology major. Celeste was the director, she should be around here, I don't know. Anyway, so all of them did the work on immigration, and most of them are now either working abroad, quite a few are working abroad, or one of them is a Fulbright scholar in Ecuador right now. And so I have the feeling that they are, in the future, they are continuing a path that they started here at Wagner College.
So far I've called, yes, I'm looking for a man.
Good luck at Wagner. Good luck at Wagner. We are Mount Holyoke South.
Feel right at home.
My name is Cyril. I teach in the government department. And I do not have a question about, or anything about the Wagner thing. I have a question, a somewhat philosophical question about LEAP. And about the signature work that you're talking about. It seems to me that there is, at least potentially, a tension between, on the one hand, problem-solving skills, which is often collaborative and emphasizes group work, and on the other, signature work, which I worry that at a place like Wagner, if we start talking in terms of signature work, it leads to, and I'm going to say this, a bourgeois sense of property about one's own learning and one's own. And how do you negotiate, how do you foresee negotiating that tension between?
I'm here to ask you exactly that. Because I do see that. I'm aware that, and we're putting these design principles for a reinvention of general education together through GEMS, and I'm mindful that we're using terms like agency and self-direction. We want the student to be empowered, and yet I certainly believe, as much as I believe you all do, that no problem can be solved unilaterally. It requires, by definition, engagement with difference and collaboration and a whole lot of respectful adjustment of what it is you first thought would be the best solution. I'm also mindful, frankly, that I'm a humanist. I don't think a lot of humanists think of themselves as solving problems. I think we just try to understand them, which may be why we meet multidisciplinary perspectives. But anyway, so I'm aware of this tension, and I appreciate you raising it. Yet you senior projects here, right? They're not doing collaborative senior projects. So how does this what insight would you have from your experience of both embracing a collaborative vision of learning, as you do, and nonetheless expecting students to do distinctive work on their own as seniors? What have you learned about how to pull all that together?
From education. I think one of the key focus for the Wagner Plan throughout is making sure that the students build a sense of shared knowledge and what does that mean, and shared leadership. So the guided reflection is essential to that component of thinking about your collaboration, like your input, the efforts that you put towards shared building of knowledge. But it has to be facilitated. So our role is making sure that we're facilitating the right kinds of questions as they experience from freshman all the way to senior. These experiences. So that we're able to try to help them make that connection to the individual.
And was there anything in your preparation as a faculty member that gave you a grounding for that? That was beautifully said. We have to be self-conscious about facilitating their guided inquiry. And I added at an increasingly more complex level, which I think is probably what you meant. But did you have any preparation for that, or did you figure it all out here?
Well, it's a combination of both. So my experiences growing up as a student, so I'm constantly thinking about what was my experience as a student, what am I bringing in as a student, and then the role that my colleagues or the theory out there says about these experiences. So intrinsically, maybe I'm the type of person that tends to take on the kind of role to do both. But then here at Wagner, what helped a lot with the Wagner Plan is being able to do these interdisciplinary conversations and connections to see what everybody else had to contribute. So I think you have to put yourself out there as faculty to seek out those opportunities and think about it in a constructive way. So it's a mixture.
This is helpful, actually, and I don't know if it really speaks to the professor's questions over here. But I'm sort of inferring from what she said. What was your name again? Katya. That part of it is building enough self-consciousness early on in your studies about the notion that any insight has to be tested against the perspectives of others. That knowledge is constructed socially, so that by the time you're doing something distinctive of your own, those practices of reaching out for other perspectives and other kinds of feedback would be built into your competency suite.
Can I just make one little addendum to that? Just on this one point. So as we're thinking about integrating maybe some of this into general education and across the 4 years in major as well, maybe a cognate to what we do with the faculty. We have scholarship circles for faculty. So maybe people are working, in their signature work in their major, in their capstone piece, but they're in a group on a common problem. A sustainability problem, whatever it might be. That would be an interesting kind of node to put together.
Right, and that's congruent, I think, with my own private thinking. I won't say it's the GEMS view, because there's 35 very opinionated people. This is my own view, that in fact you're creating a collectivity in which the point of general education is constantly being enacted. First we're getting ready to do this, then we're starting to do it, then we're getting better at doing it, and finally we're supporting one another while we're doing something that's distinctively your own and is your signature work. Yes?
Yeah, I guess one of the ways to address that is sort of this combination that we do in the history senior LC, which itself has a structure where two faculty are working together as sort of a model for how ideas can bounce back and forth.
So every student who's in the history department who does a senior LC is doing it in this context with two faculty members?
Right, and in one class they're writing their thesis, which is very much about problem solving on an area of interest, and in the other class they're writing an autobiography, which has to be at least 25 pages but can be as long as 80.
Wow.
Some students really want to reflect, and actually, so in several just autobiographies, they're about addressing an issue like immigration, like leadership in particular civic issues. And through those autobiographies, the goal is not just to have them process the knowledge, but a lot of it has to do with developing empathy, particularly seeing their own families as immigrant families before they go out and interact with other immigrants. So there's the reflective sort of problem-solving reflection piece, but then they have to present them to each other, often also in the process talking about their real interaction with immigrants out there in the community. And so somehow that seminar or that presentation format where they see what the other student in the group learned is really the big learning moment. Or seeing how they overcame a challenge with sources in the history discipline to address a problem is also like a big learning moment. So I think it's some combination of this reflection in writing and then this group conversation and dialogue.
This is really encouraging. I had a mentor at the University of Chicago, Jonathan Smith. We were just looking at a text that he was the primary architect of, 1991 as the publication date. And part of his argument always was, and it made its way into that text, that we ought to be helping students develop their own intellectual autobiography, and that ought to be just as important as the academic work that they're doing in the senior thesis. And that has very much influenced my thinking.
Reading autobiographies like Nelson Mandela's autobiography as like a role model for the
Yes.
writing of their own
Yes.
autobiography. And so there's different steps that we take. It's not exactly that it's a problem civic theme, but they come up in the writing.
Well, there's sort of still time to influence what we say about all this. I have been conscious that I wanted to honor the kind of questions that might be private questions. I don't want to tell students, well, if it's not publicly significant, it's not college worthy. And at the same time, mindful that we do want to reclaim a sense of public purpose to higher education. And so the way I'm playing it out in my own mind, so I don't know whether you would agree, my own mind, I only have one, is that any question that's important to you probably has a public significance as well, an ethical significance, a moral significance, an identity significance. You ought to be able to describe it, why this question is important. So that much ought to be part of it, not just that I cared about it, and therefore I did my signature work on it. But I also spent some time trying to think for how else might this, or for whom else might this work or this question also be significant. There were a bunch of hands up. Yes, Samantha?
So I have two comments. First, this model very much reminds me of how Wagner has designed our Bonner Leaders program. So curricularly, we get to design, the Bonner program is a national network. It's a national program, but the curriculum and how we actually do our program is up to us. And so it's largely a co-curricular program where we support academic learning and try to apply what students are learning in their classes to their Bonner internship. They have to do 300 hours a year in a community-based internship. And this big questions, and right at the bottom of the LEAF challenge and brief where you're saying here the goal is tapping into students' own motivations, which begin with their questions and priorities, is how we frame their freshman year. What is it that motivates you? What is it that excites you? What questions are you asking? But what I think is missing, and this is because I'm the community partnerships person, and one of them, many of you all are the community partnership holders here. And it is, how does your question interact with the community? How does it change? And I think that is so important.
How does your question interact with the community? Do you mean to say, how does your question influence your interaction with the community, or?
Influence is a way to start, but how is it going to change? Your question, you're going to go, when we go into the community with a research agenda or an idea in mind, for example, I was an education major, and I studied relational aggression and bullying. I'm coming into this classroom to teach about relational aggression and bullying. If I didn't sit and listen and learn about what are the issues of bullying in the school and how is my question going to change to
Okay, that's good. I like that. I like that. Yeah.
Then I would not be doing good for the community. I wouldn't be solving a problem. I wouldn't be having to adjust or adapt to an unscripted problem. I would be there for my own self-interest. And as an employee, that's really not how it works. So I think
Yeah.
having students, scaffolding learning and having students
Yeah.
learn that their question changes as
Right.
they work with others.
I like that a lot, the notion of how your question has evolved over time and what have been the influences on that evolution. And at Wagner, obviously, those influences are going to include experiences in the community-based learning, but that wouldn't always be true.
That's true. And then the last comment, this idea we have here, faculty and mentors. I think it's really important to, that's at the top of definitions. I think it's really important to note that to do this successfully, you need lots of mentors and lots of people who are involved. This kind, at Wagner specifically, community engaged work and learning, it's very involved, and, it takes a lot of people to support. So I think a lot of this is also about aligning resources that will help support a student's learning, so that we have very specific.
Right. This is helpful.
To lunch in a second, but you want to drill Ellis since he's.
I do. He was put on notice. He hasn't raised his hand.
He's working in IT, so this kind of grabbed him. He's lost.
So, Ellis, do you want to have the last word on this?
That's a bit of a responsibility. I think a lot of it depends on the student, though. The level of inquiry inherent to the student. I mean, you can't teach intellectual curiosity, would be my position on it.
If that's your position, that you can't bring it out if it's not there. You don't think that a lot of our schooling is suppressing curiosity that might have been there?
Without a doubt.
But it may be too late by the time they get to college.
And when you have the pervasiveness of a necessity to go to college, you are bringing in a larger population that perhaps the structured liberal learning environment is not one that does anything for them, which isn't to say they're not intellectually curious. It's simply to say that they're being required economically and societally to adhere to a structure that, for whatever reason, doesn't fit how they work.
But I'm trying to promote the concept of something that's adaptable to what they are interested in. And building on what Samantha said, I could imagine that you might, I don't know, maybe your interest is in dealing drugs. But I've heard that might be an issue. But that the way the organization, the educational experience is scaffolded, you'd be led to at least have some fresh thoughts about why that was what was on your. Yeah. So I'm trying to be open to what's actually on their minds, and mindful that I had a freshman teacher, first-year teacher, who asked me what was on my mind, and what was on my mind was a really stupid thing, but she enabled me to build it into a larger question, for which I have been forever grateful. So.
One more, then we'll break for lunch.
I can give this away. I'm not actually a professor here yet, I guess. I've been thinking a lot about I was a student, yes, twice. I've been thinking a lot about trying to build a social innovation program, entrepreneurship program. My dad was one, and I would love to do his name. I'd love to figure out a way to actually figure that out. But with the Wagner Plan and with what we do, and we're already civically engaged. We're already out in a community where there are problems. And I think from what I've been asking students, I've been asking everything from faculty to trustees, everyone. It seems like what we need to start thinking about maybe is we're in these communities, and we're here because we're being innovative and we're doing these amazing things. But what we need to do more of is teach the kids how to be creative and teach them how to come up with, okay, we're gonna go volunteer and help, I was telling you this before, help clean up this, this green belt, this swamp. We're gonna go help clean it up. Well, great, we're gonna volunteer and help. But what I think they might appreciate a lot more and really take with them is we're going to help clean it up, but we're also going to figure out why it's dirty. And we're going to maybe build a fence or make sure that there is a garbage pail where the people walk. Make sure that, maybe it's bringing a bill to the local government, but like doing something that's lasting. I think that will also, and whether it's, at the first year program level, I mean, I have 2 interns from here, and they're amazing. I had one last year. She was the valedictorian. She was fabulous. But something that I've started to do is I have them write their eulogy, and it's funny that you have them write their autobiography. I have them write their eulogy when they start.
I think we need an inductive survey of just exactly how many forms of self-reflection are being.
These are only 2, and this isn't a class. This is just me being crazy. But it's interesting for them to
it helps them pick a direction.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
don't know if that's useful at
Yeah,
all, but I
yeah.
mean, it's definitely, I mean, everything you said with the LEAP challenge is the Wagner Plan, and it's motivation and doing something like writing a eulogy or figuring out your values in the very beginning.
Yeah,
That,
yeah.
what are their motivations? And
Yeah.
then followed with communication, and you need to learn whether it's persuasion or, you know, how to actually properly articulate these things to make the difference. And then harnessing that and figuring out what are the problems, and not just what are they, and let me fix it for right now, how do I fix it
Yeah,
forever?
so that it makes a difference. Well, thank you. You have not discouraged me from proceeding with the LEAP challenge, so I appreciate that.
I would just say, we're going to get over in a second, I would just say to close, that obviously the task force on general education will follow the GEMS program pretty I mean, we do a lot of transference right off the website of their insights and how we graft or challenge or expand those ideas. It's a pretty formidable group that is working on this, it's
Yeah,
pretty
it's
cutting
true.
edge. And then secondly, I would expect that, and maybe I would just suggest this to the task force, that it be an open dialogue. That is to say, not just the group that's working on their own, comes out with a report in 18 months, but rather a series of sessions, like facilitated dialogue we're going to do this afternoon, as we're going through different parts of it over the next 18 months, informed by outside information, sort of like GEMS and other pieces that we find, a lot by our own experience and our assessment data too, which was pretty good. And I think we'll invent something that will be, again, as I said with the Wagner Plan this morning, it's here. It's a matter of how we then draft it and cut it and shape it into and fashion it, I guess is the word, into something which
Yeah.
gets at these very pieces more
Yeah,
intentionally.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
very exciting.
Yeah,
Thanks.
okay, thank you.